particular ed. But when we talk about the participatory aspect, what we are saying is that we go into the community, become part and parcel of the community, get to understand the people, the issues that we're exploring, and perhaps maybe work with them. And research has proven over the years, and even based on some of the work that we have been doing in Ghana, we realized that the outcome of engaging with people and making them partners in the study or the research, the outcome turns out to be very enriching, and it also helps. So it's does not only benefit the researchers, but benefits the community as well, in terms of what we're trying to look at. So that is how I look at it when we're talking about participatory research. Please feel free if you have any questions, feel free to ask, or maybe just let me know through the conversation section and the chat section, and maybe I'll respond to that. So what is the root cause? The root of participatory research could be traced in several fields. And according to, some of the data information that we have around, we know it's originated from adult education, sociology, international development, and other fields. So it's been around for quite a period of time. And it's really great because when you look at it, the focus becomes, it's not so much really data focused where maybe we go in wanting to gather the data, but it also helps in terms of building relationship, relating to people in the community, getting to understand where they are coming from and other things. So what we'll be doing is, we'll be talking a little bit about some of the projects that we are engaged in Ghana and how we use participatory research and the benefits that we've generated so far. So what I have just explains, some of these PowerPoints just explains the participatory research, but wanting to talk a little bit. So let's look at the approach in terms of study, how we use the participatory, because a lot of people think that when we talk about participatory action research or participatory research approach, all that we're talking about is qualitative. We can engage in quantitative research and also use that as well. We can engage in mixed methods and use it as well. So in research, we have concrete tools, techniques, and processes that we use for our study. However, when we're using participatory action, what we do is we bring all these tools together and we work with our partners. So the people that we bring on board to serve as partners in our research, and we develop the questions together. We develop the approach and also the analysis and other things together. But it varies from community to community. Some people may decide to develop the questions with the partners, and then perhaps maybe they will do the analysis themselves. Others engage. In our research in Ghana, what we do is we work with our partners in developing the questionnaire and other things. But when it comes to the analysis, it depends. There are some research projects that we engage with our partners in doing the analysis, and then we do the write-up as researchers. In other instances, we do the analysis and we do the write-up as well. So it depends on the agreement that you engage with your partners in working on this project, or the project that you have. So I have this bit that talks about how the steps that we use in engaging in participatory research methods. So we have establishing the partnership, that is the beginning stages. Steve, I can make the PowerPoint available if anyone needs it. So the beginning stage is developing the research partnership. You build the relationship. And that is what we call the beginning stages. What are the boundaries? What steps? How do you go about it? And then the design, you develop the research questions. And it could be perhaps maybe doing it together or maybe doing it independently as a researcher before going into the field. And also with the collection of data, with our experience, what we do is we allow our partners to do the gathering of the data because we see them as gatekeepers. They are individuals who are familiar with the community, they have the lived experience, and they know the language. Because in Ghana, much as they use English as a form of, is the lingua franca, the mode of communication in schools and other things, one thing we need to bear in mind is there are also people who perhaps have not had a chance to be educated, particularly in the field of disability, because our research, most of them are in mental health disability. And in the field of disability, there are lots of individuals who've not had the opportunity to go through the school system. So working with collaborators or maybe our partners, it helps a great deal because they understand the culture, they know the language, and they are able to engage. So it works out well. And also the analysis stage, as I said earlier, it depends on the agreement that you would come to. In some of our studies, we have some of our partners who do the data gathering and also the analysis, and then we do the write-up and then the dissemination. So it varies from one partner to the other, or one project to the other, or one community to the other. So that is basically the approach. And what are the benefits? Talking about participatory research approach, what are the benefits of it? The benefits tend to be quite a bit, enormous, because what happens is with, have a few points here, it talks about knowledge production in the real world, and it's also conducted in a democratic and a collaborative manner. Partners, though, are the partners who go into the community or those with lived experience. Because they have the lived experience, they want the world or others to know exactly what they go through. So they are passionate about the project or what they work on, and they are able to, engage in terms of the data that they are gathering, and it helps a great deal. It also enables researchers to deeply engage stakeholders and communities at each step of the research process. So at each step of the research process, we're able to engage deeply with the stakeholders, participants, and the community as a whole. And that is also another benefit. And also the collective wisdom of both the researchers and the community. There is a saying in Ghana that you may be an academic, you may have wisdom, the knowledge, the PhDs and other things. But one thing you need to know is that, one thing you need to bear in mind that there are people who may not be educated, and yet they may be wiser than you are because they know the lay of the land and they have the experience. So in a project of this nature, you do not only engage academics, but you engage people who have, the knowledge on the ground. And so bringing these two parties together, it's really brilliant, and it works out well in terms of the project that you're working on. So you benefit from the collective wisdom of both the researchers and the community as well. And also we talk about it contributes to the flourishing of individuals, communities, and also the ecosystem in which the partners are part of. So every person who participates in the study benefits from it. So it becomes, a win-win for both the community and also the researcher as well, instead of more often than not becoming a win for the researcher, but not the community. Benefits research informed by the relevant to real-world context, and also the results effectively translated into community and non-academic settings. The rigor and the research and all these things, they help a great deal because in actual fact, we're able to use the theoretical, the methodological approaches, and also the non-academic approach as well. So we get the best of both worlds in our approach in the study that we engage in. So that is basically what we look at. But one thing that perhaps maybe I did not add to my notes is also the challenges that we face when you engage in a study of this nature. In a country like Ghana, there are a few things we need to bear in mind. That what happens is that the culture is such that because Ghana happened to be colonized, was once upon a time colonized, there is the mindset of a lot of people is that they often look at individuals who are coming from the Western world as well being knowledgeable, wealthy, and the list goes on and on and on. So when you engage with partners, depending on where you are and the partners that you engage in the project with, there are times you need to be able to read through, be able to understand where they're coming from. Because if you're not very careful, they tend to accept virtually every feedback that you give them. They don't push back, they don't question, because they think that because you're from the Western world, you know it all, and you have all the wisdom that there is. And that can be a bit of a challenge. So more often than not, you need to be able to establish that rapport, that relationship with the partners. And that helps if you're able to establish that, that helps in understanding, what you're looking for. All right, so let's look at a few of the projects that we have in Ghana. The first project, one of the projects that we have looking at the history of disability in Ghana, this is a SHEC-funded project. And what we did is the goal was to interview individuals who participated. Maybe Jeff is here, perhaps maybe he can chime in as well. Interview individuals who have, who've been, these were individuals who happened to be perhaps maybe pioneers of the disability movement in Ghana. And what we did is we engaged, with our partners who happened to be those who engaged in interviews. These were people with lived experience of disability and familiar with the landscape so far as disability is concerned in Ghana. And it worked out well in terms of data gathering and the information that they were able to gather with regard to the research. And these people were able to travel wide, far and wide through Ghana, and were able to meet with some of these individuals, some on the verge of, almost at the latter stages in life. And they were able to gather a lot of data with regard to the history with regard to the disability movement in Ghana. So it's also great if you're able to engage with such partners, because the data that is gathered tends to be very rich and also worth our while. I don't know if, Jeff, you want to add to it. And also we have another project that we're working on during the during the period of COVID. We also engage some of our partners in gathering a little bit of information with regard to how individuals with disability in Ghana are coping with COVID-19 in Ghana. I have about a couple of minutes clip that I'll be showing, and also one or two pictures that shows exactly how these individuals are able to gather the information. Because somebody with a disability is able to, they have that sympathy, and understand where maybe somebody's coming from. And in actual fact, the pictures that they have really is a reflection of some of the approaches that they used in gathering the data and also the projects that we're working on. So we have this as the picture from the field. This is an individual we met years ago when we were engaging in one of our projects at TAFO with Jeff Grishow. And this individual is a retired school teacher, and he shared a lot of experience in terms of his lived experience with disability and other things in the community, and also provided some form of feedback and insights into what is expected of individuals in the school system. And also in one of our projects, what we did is we gave cameras to individuals with disability for them to go into the community and take pictures. Any picture at all that they felt would be appropriate for them. And that was really also the outcome. The information that they provided was quite insightful. And this is another picture from one of the projects that we worked on in the field, that shared insight into their lived experience as well. So I just want to show you this clip with regard to during COVID and how they coped. The interview was conducted in the Ghanaian language. We call it Chi, but we try to transcribe, so we would have the writing underneath it. So hopefully you may see it clearly and maybe know what you're talking about.
A disabled person, said by and say, maybe I never did the brain, you have a son. If you don't want or I said the other bed, Mamma, then one said, wait, said the other said, baby, who's me, baby, I just watching those mass at this all. And so you need now, maybe I'll be seeing you, Vanessa, and you see now, how.
Yeah, so this tend to be a part of a series of clips that we gathered from individuals with disability and how they're coping with COVID in Ghana. And this worked out well because we have partners in Ghana who also have the same lived experience, and they've been through it or lived with them, or they've experienced it in the community, and that enhanced the project. So overall, that is what we've been working with. And in a nutshell, that is a little that I can share with you with regard to the projects that we've been working on. It's not only the two projects that we have also the educational project, but also looked at it from a different perspective. Hopefully, maybe in future we can, when we get some findings from that study, we can share that as well. I don't know if there are any questions or any concerns. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to say anything right now.
Just one, maybe one thing to say about the photos and the video. So we have videos of I believe 10 individuals, and we're in the process of trying to edit them. Each of the videos, each of the interviews was about 10 minutes long. We're trying to edit them down to 2 to 3 minute video clips. The questions were, in this case, the questions were standardized, and we worked them out in consultation with a partner on the ground. And I should also mention that this was done remotely, so it wasn't a situation where Magnus and I went to Ghana and did the interviews ourselves. We provided a smartphone to a research assistant, and he went around his local community doing the interviews and taking the pictures and recording. So everything was done on an iPhone. And the other bit of context about him was that he's a young research assistant. His father's disabled, and the RA in this case also has a degree in biomedical engineering. So he's got some experience in that field as well, right? So he has an understanding of the issues, and he was able to really gain access to the community members, and that part of this was entirely up to him. And I see a question from Julie: consent to use the videos and sharing the ethics. Was it difficult? I mean, Steve and Magnus can speak to ethics review as well. It did take multiple rounds. We'd already gone through a process that took, for this larger project, quite a long time, and there was a lot of discussion back and forth with the REB. So it was a challenge, but by the time it came around to this remote project, it was very simple because we already had permission from the REB to waive confidentiality. So we have consent forms approved by the REB that waives confidentiality and has consent on the part of the individuals to share their photos and their images. And it was already set up. And getting the 3C, category 3C approval for this was fairly quick as well.
Just before you continue, Jeff, Magnus, I'm wondering if you want to stop your screen sharing, then we can see everyone. And these are great questions. And Jeff, continue with that second one, then we can talk a little bit about some of the consent issues.
Yeah, just very quickly, Julie, to your next question. Participants happier to share if they're involved in the research. Virtually everyone was happy to share their insights, partly because they were involved at the grassroots with the RA. I think that trust was already there because it wasn't a question of us going in. I mean, although we did develop trust in this area for over a fairly long period of time, I actually do have a connection to this general area going back about 31 years. So it's not a new sort of place in that sense for me. And then of course, Magnus, I mean, you have your solid connections, right, and experience culturally in Ghana. So so I think that was a factor.
Maybe we can just talk about that for a moment, and the question that Ida is also raising there about and Magnus, I know our colleague Bree Atkinson, your colleague Bree Atkinson, who does a lot of work in really challenging refugee situations, displaced people's areas and so forth. This whole issue of confidentiality has been a fairly significant issue raised with research ethics boards, because I think we've all discovered that in a number of our contexts, participants actually, are asking for the information to be shared and to be associated with it because they want this story to be on a global stage, so to speak. Magnus, any thoughts on that?
Yes, and also perhaps maybe looking at it from the perspective of Ghana, issues of disability and mental illness, there is a huge stigma around that because people don't want to talk about it. So engaging with these individuals, they try to give voice to individuals whose voices are not being heard. So with regard to the idea of confidentiality, we go through the process, and a lot of them are more than willing to share their stories, letting their stories be heard and let people know what they go through.
The research ethics, I think it would be great if Magnus and Jeff talked a little bit more about this, because Julie, you and I have had a little bit of conversation back and forth in the chat about that. this is one of the challenges, can I say, Magnus, around participatory action research. It's supposed to be kind of organic, ground up. So you don't always know what your questions are going to be. You don't always know what your research methodology is going to be. And yet our institutional, not just Laurier generally, our institutional approaches are you have to get research ethics permission before you can engage with human research. And yet much of the research emerges from the community, and what are the topics and questions and even the approaches that are going to be meaningful for that community. So you don't always have those things in advance. Do you want to speak any further about that, Magnus, and some of the experience you've had?
Yeah, and also the challenge that comes up is we tend to look at our research and ethics through the lenses of perhaps maybe the Eurocentric approach, what we know from the Western world, without necessarily being culturally sensitive of where we're going, be it Ghana or what have you. And that has been a bit of a challenge over the years, because with one of our projects, it took us almost about 6 months to get ethics clearance, because we had to be going back and forth, asking all questions with regard to honorariums, with regard to confidentiality and all these things before we were able to get clearance. So it can be challenging. And with this participatory action, participatory research, it's really important that we try to also let our ethics, research and ethics folks know that, well, a lot of the things that we have on paper are different from what we encounter when we go to the research area. So it's important we try to be a bit flexible in our approach and how we engage as well.
Yeah, good response. Other questions? I know we've kind of focused on some of the confidentiality and ethics issues, but maybe there's other questions around the approach itself, and or others who've engaged with this you want to share from your experience. Yeah, Avis, keep going.
Sorry, I'm pressing buttons left and right. I was curious about both of your experience, Steve, as well, in this type of research with children. And I know the ethics piece is quite complicated. I have interests in refugee education with quite a specific group in Greece who are experiencing informal education. And there's been very little research directly with the children and youth. I'm just curious your thoughts on how this might apply to young people.
Yeah, as you were speaking, a thought just came to mind. Our recent project in Ghana, the education project that we're working on right now, we realized that the challenge that we have is interviewing individuals who are perhaps maybe below the age of 12. And that requires maybe having the parents around to engage in that. But the challenge that we have is having the parent around. Well, looking at a place like Ghana, having the parent around, does that give the child the freedom to share what they have in mind, what they want a researcher to know? We don't really know about that. And I think it can be challenging when you were using participatory action or participatory research with children. I haven't done it before, and I don't know how it entails, because more often than not, what we've been discussing is, well, the moment you get to a certain stage, we need parents to be around. So how do you guard against that? And that is a challenge that we often have. I don't know if maybe Steve or Jeff, you want to speak to that.
Well, I'll just add into that. Again, this is the importance of knowing the context, isn't it, Magnus? And if I've just put a link into Bree's podcast, I would highly encourage, if you're interested in this, she has done some excellent podcasts on some of these kinds of questions with children, with regard to the research ethics. If you look at episode 3 in that link, that was one I was part of, in which we talked about some examples from our various research contexts about the issues and challenges around research ethics. Her episode 2 of body worn cameras, if I remember correctly, Magnus, that was, they kind of traced children's, and there's lots of questions around this, tracing children's movements through refugee camps and where were the kind of places that they would visit and so on and so forth. That's some risky stuff. And so again, going through that process, from a participatory, what's the community want, right? Magnus, like Bree found that this is what the community wants, but the research ethics board is kind of like, well, what about legitimate concerns around safety and so forth? So these are some of the challenges, I guess, that it's not easy. I wish I've got a research ethics application that's sitting in front of the REB right now, which kind of takes the project that Magnus is leading in Ghana, and we got similar funding for Haiti, same kinds of questions, trying to do a comparative piece, and it's hung up in research ethics again, because there are questions around, is it okay to approve a research ethics, it's not approve, it's give clearance to a research ethics program if there are aspects which are nebulous. And I think Magnus participatory research often, it has a framework. It's not like it's just, willy-nilly, but it's not always clear cut where it's going to go and what kinds of questions the community is going to say are important around disability. Anyway, sorry, that was just a little sidebar, but yeah, Julie, go ahead.
I did put it in the chat. I have in the past, and my research geographically is close by in the region, but in terms, it's more a business culture. So working with industry, and I have in the past had an advisory board. So it wouldn't exactly be participatory research, but they did a lot of the same things, informed the questions that we're going to ask, and gave advice around the participants that we actually invite and that sort of thing. So I don't know how different that is. Maybe it's just a level of their involvement, or whether you consider that participatory research, and maybe they weren't included at all in the ethics. Do you include your participants then in the ethics at any point, other than to say they will be involved?
Magnus, do you want to, I think in the project you and Jeff have had, you've had a kind of a parallel structure as far as an advisory group, so to speak. Good points, Julie, because I think, Magnus is using the context of his research. You're translated into your research and make sense. What are the parallels there? Any thoughts, Magnus?
Yeah, I think you're making a very good point, Julie, and I really, with regard to the study with us, well, let me start with the ethics approach. With ethics, we let them know that we're going to include, the participants and the partners and their role and other things. So we outlined that, and so off the bat, we know which direction we're going to be going. With yours, it depends on what you're actually looking at and what you're trying to explore. Yeah, there are times you can engage the community or your partners in terms of setting the questions and other things, but it depends on what you're looking at, what you're exploring, and how involved you're going to be in the study. But from the way you are sharing, it has an aspect of participatory research, because they are part of the question, developing the questions and the project that you're working on. But in terms of REB, yes, definitely you need to outline exactly the role of the community and how you're going to go about it as well.
I see that Hina has joined us, and I'm going to give a teaser instead of a spoiler alert. Hi, Hina. So in our next research lunch and learn, right, Hina, we're going to talk about some, I'll just say EDI aspects of research that we need to be aware of. And I think that your response, Magnus, speaks to some of that as well, right? Like, how do we take into consideration the aspects that are particular, unique, whatever it might be to a certain community that might be seen differently in a different community, a Western perspective or global North perspective, as opposed to a perspective in the global South, or to go real, and that's a horrible aggregate, right? But a rural community in Northern Ghana, right? And what that's going to look like might be very different than what a research ethics board in a Westernized context is going to be thinking about and considering. Okay, other questions? That was good.
It's not a question, and I'm sorry I came late to this conversation, and I'm kind of catching up, but it's really interesting what I have heard. And so yeah, I guess just sort of pulling off of those points, like I do think it's really interesting about so yeah, like obviously we have sort of what are like the compliance-based like research ethics board things that we have to sort of think about, but then One thing that sort of popped up is like, well, it makes me sort of think about like the positionality of scholars, right? And like where we, you know, what is like, oh, and so we have these like sort of guidelines sort of governing that for like Indigenous research in Canada. But then oftentimes like when Canadian scholars go into international context, or like when international scholars like come to Canada and then like do that kind of research here, right? There isn't the same, like in terms of like accountability mechanisms for like what's actually like held in place. And then just like, in addition to that, like once you get to the publication phase, right? And so like when it comes to like what is like most cited, or what's considered like a top tier journal in one's field, well, like oftentimes it's like publications like based out of Western universities like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, like all those things, right? Even though like I was reading a piece on well, just like I forgot, yeah, I was in a conversation where someone was talking about like when it comes to like climate change research, and how like a lot of the research that's sort of like done by like the communities most affected by climate change, like in like the global South, how oftentimes like that work is not coming into those same like networks of conversation and like citation that maybe like Western scholars might be doing. So it's like those sort of like global inequities are obviously like replicated in the research landscape. So that's like, I don't know, just one of the things that I find interesting, but it also like permeates other parts of the research process, which is what, when I entered into this conversation today, like seemed to be also what was like capturing what the folks in this virtual room were talking about as well. So
can we just take a moment to talk about that, or one aspect of what you said? And I'm wondering, Magnus, the idea of, let's just talk about kind of how does information about the work that you are doing in Ghana, how does it get mobilized at that local level? How is so beyond the participatory research data collection, what about I used in the conversation to Julie's point around design thinking, the feedback loops. How is the community engaged with that knowledge being shared, mobilized, and so forth? Any insights or thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I can share a few, particularly, well, Jeff, you can also feel free to jump in. I think what comes to mind right away has to do with one of the projects that we're working on at TAFO. I mean, where we took the pictures and other things where I think in our conversation with the community, we realized that they were able to share some of the challenges that they are encountering, as part of who they are as individuals, the lack of support that they get, the lack of, what have you. And as a result, they are willing to work with us to ensure that at least we are able to disseminate the information that we've gathered, to bring awareness to the challenges that they are facing in their community. So one in particular instant had to do with, we met with them and they were able to provide so much information that I think, Jeff, remind me if I think I'm missing some aspects of it, but at least they were willing to support us in terms of bringing awareness to the lack of support that they are getting in their community. And I think that is an aspect that we realize, that we realize with regard to the project. Also, what is happening is that we have partners in the various universities in Ghana. The one in Kumasi, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and also University of Ghana. And these are partners that we publish with. So they are able to use some of the materials or the articles that we publish in Ghanaian universities as well. We recently published a paper on mental health and stigma. And surprisingly, an African newspaper picked it up and asked us to summarize it to about 1,000 words, where they would distribute it within the continent of Africa. So I think it's gradually gaining traction, where some of the information are really being provided to people in the community to bring awareness to the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Magnus. Other questions?
But I think Hina also made a very important point here, with regard to dissemination of information. I think we live in a world, despite all that we hear about EDIs and other things, that we realize a lot of information from the global South tend to be discounted, not necessarily discounted, but it's not really elevated as much as information from the global north, right? So somebody may be writing about disability in the global south, and yet a few people will be looking at it and say, well, this is really important. But the moment it's from the global north, it's like seen as the gospel, something that people would have to embrace. And I think these are some of the challenges that researchers in the global south we encounter. And I think it's about time we start talking, start having serious conversations about these issues. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you, Magnus. That sounds like a whole nother lunch and learn. Jeff, keep going.
Yeah, just a couple of things relating to this work. One is that we're still talking to our partners in Ghana about how to share the oral histories that we've gathered or that they've gathered, because that was a big component of one of the projects, and we have over 200 of them. So to make them accessible to disability associations in Ghana. So we're working with our partners. And the other thing that I've found is that, I mean, it's, when you think about dissemination, it's complex as well, right? And I think our partners in Ghana, and we should mention, Magnus, that we have 3 main partners in Ghana. They're all persons with disabilities, and they're all disability scholars. 2 of them are professors in disability studies, and one of them is the head of the Ghana Blind Union, which is the largest national organization working on blind programming for blind Ghanaians. And certainly the professors, the disability scholars professors are looking at, I mean, you know, they obviously disseminate their research locally in terms of their connections, right? Especially with disabled people's organizations, but they also want to publish in Western journals, right? So that's a big part of their career. So, I mean, we're working with them in co-authoring, which I think is something we haven't talked about, but the publications out of that project are at this point all co-authored, and they are going into Western-based journals. And the Ghanaians want that to happen as well, for that, you know, to reach that audience. And also, I think in some cases, I think, Magnus, I'm thinking about the edited book. So this is not a Ghana project, it's Africa. So we're just finishing up, we're in pre-production now with James Curry for an edited volume on disability rights in Africa. And Magnus and I are editing the volume. All of the authors are Africa-based. It's James Curry, but they have offered, without prompting from us, they've offered to co-publish with an African publisher. So we're helping to fund that. So it's going to be available. It's called Sub-Saharan African Press. So, I mean, it's more, you know, it's, I think there's a lot of complexity in terms of dissemination when you ask, especially partners in our case, in Ghana on the ground, where do you want to, you know, to get this information out? It's both, right? It's the international Western publications, and it's sort of getting it out locally. And I think that's important. And the other thing that really struck me in a conversation with Magnus, with Wisdom Mfoafo, who is a deaf scholar, a professor of disability studies, and the head of West Africa's only disability research center. You know, I was talking to him about different perspectives on disability, and I won't go into it in detail, but there's a kind of progressive social model of disability, which has sort of replaced in many ways an older charitable medical model of disability. One is a very top-down sort of impairment equals disability, and people need to be fixed. And the other is bottom up, and that disability is, it's imposed by non-disabled society on disabled persons, and it's more of a social phenomenon. And what Wisdom was saying was the reality for him is that he you know, supports the social model of disability, but the reality in Ghana is that in his teaching, he's taking a kind of medical model approach, because at a very basic level, that's what's needed. So it really is, once you get onto the ground, it can be, you have to negotiate, right? These different, I'm sure you've probably found that as well in Haiti, Steve, but it's been an interesting, you know, process.
Isn't that the beauty of participatory research, though? It's complicated and it's complex.
Yep.
It's not linear.
Mhm.
It's not clean cut. I
Yeah.
mean, Ida, your comment, and Monique, your comments in the chat, I think reflect some of those wonderings, some of those questions, and it doesn't fit into a box necessarily. So I'm just going to use that as a segue to say, Magnus, thank you for being with us today. Welcome back, by the way, and great to see you. It's always lovely. And to all of you who've been here today, thank you for joining us. This is kind of a typical research lunch, lots of Q&A, hopefully giving you some thoughts for the future. Hina is going to be doing our next one on Friday, March the 4th. We'll be sending information out for you to register for that. I think, Ida, we're going to have you do one at some point too. We just need to get that scheduled, but that I think will be another lunch and learn. So I think there's some good ones coming forward. It's great to be part of this this community where a number of you have led these lunch and learns in the past. I find them always, just kind of reinvigorating and thinking about some things that perhaps I don't think about on a minute. Maybe the rest of you are different than me. I don't think about these things on a minute by minute basis, but it was